password on this computer.
Thank you. And now that I've found the mute button, we're all set to go here. I'm afraid I'm going to have to take issue with Stephen's introduction of himself because I feel it leaves a few things out. And I should tell all of you that Stephen is very humble and I'm about to make him miserable because, you know, why not? So Stephen has not just been accidentally, occasionally writing about Metro. He's been doing it since 2015. And to be perfectly frank, I've heard and seen numerous reporters on the beat consult him as an expert. And his gift is, and I just want to be clear that Stephen is one of the most thorough and cautious people out there. As far as I can tell, he has seen every slide in every of the hundreds of pages of PDFs that are presented to the WMATA board before they meet. Last I checked, I think he had read most of the RFPs that WMATA has ever issued. And just to give you an idea of how ahead he's been on this one particular issue, back in, I don't remember when it was, but I know that when the contract for the 7000s series trains, the ones which are currently not available to be used by riders, when that contract was first out, only some of it is out because it is so only sort of a public document without getting into in the woods. But the point is, Stephen was the one who Stephen has requested a copy of that document from Metro. I'm sure that they, under the Metro's version of a FOIA is PARP. And I'm sure Stephen can tell us exactly how much money they want for that. But it's always fun to see reporters catching up with Stephen. And his gift is to write carefully, clearly, and unlike many other people who talk about WMATA, Stephen manages to leave out the hyperbole, and always use reason, aka Metro reasons. He is we are welcoming him here to Maryland, despite the fact that he's a Nova, born and bred in Northern Virginia, and lives in a very Metro dependent area of Arlington. And again, we're very, very lucky to have Stephen.
Well, that was far too kind of a intro, Renee. I don't even know how I can follow that. Might as well just wrap up and go home now. I appreciate all that. I am coming over from the other side of the river, although in the Ballston area of Arlington, so we do have 2 transit lines, a whole bunch of Metro buses, a whole bunch of ART buses, all that other fun stuff in the area. I have not looked at my walk score, but I would hope it would be nice. I did realize I'd probably not doing it during COVID, but I did end up finding my Smart Trip card for the day. Used that twice earlier going into the office. Because I've been back in the office for quite a while for the completely unrelated unrelated to Metro stuff that I get to do that pays for the fun that I end up having writing about Metro. So let me share my screen and we can get this thing on the road. While I'm sharing my screen, feel free to, if there are questions that come up or anything, feel free to drop them in the chat, interrupt me, whatever the easiest way to, question-wise, whether it's on topic, off topic, hopefully Metro related. Yeah. So let me start. So yeah, about Renee covered a bunch of this, so I'm not going to do all that again. I sort of got roped into writing about Metro initially because of Matt Johnson, who I believe some or most of you probably already know, who does fantastic bike planning for Montgomery County. Those of us on the Arlington side of the river are a bit envious of the kind of actual infrastructure that you guys are getting. So that was my initial intro to Greater Washington back in 2015. I forget the exact circumstances. I had a blog post out about how the Silver Line, doing some data analytics about the Silver Line and its impact on mainly the orange and blue lines that got picked up. And 6 years later, here we are. I'm still writing about Metro. Unsurprisingly, there is still stuff to write about Metro 6 years later. It has, it's been a quite eventful time period, although even there is probably no uneventful time period since Metro began. Let's see. So mostly talking about the derailment stuff tonight. If you have questions, general Metro stuff, I'm certainly happy to try and answer or try and see what I happen to know. There's, as much as I do know, there's plenty that I don't know. I will be the first person to admit that. But there are many questions that I don't even think to come up with, which is what having multiple people in a room is certainly better for. So the derailment, sort of before the sort of phase it in three parts. Before the derailment, sort of the last year and a half, there's a bunch of stuff that's happened then. The derailment, whatever happens between now and when we get back to normal, what is normal anymore? Do any of us know what is time? All these things are in question these days, and Q&A and all that other fun stuff. So I had a couple of screenshots in here, just a couple of the pieces that I've written over the years. I am on Twitter. I'm the Metro Reasons guy. I write about Metro. I'm on GGWash. I went through, I just pulled out a couple of the stories that I thought did a little bit better than the others. The one at the bottom on the left is one of the recent ones, 7,000 related. It's on online. Welcome to read anything, leave or critique, criticize, comments, anything. If you have any, and got a bunch of others on the that's went back to 2016. A couple of these sort of play little bits and pieces into the present, into topics of the presentation. The 6,000 series 1 from last year specifically, but a little bit of the the track work one at the top, and system service hours impact to how often and how long the trains run in the rail system. Little outside my realm of expertise, but how that impacts the how the bus system has shifted because of that, some of those late night service things. There is lots and lots within the Metro realm. I mainly focus on, or have focused more on Metrorail. That's where more of the money is, more of the oversight and interest. But I am certainly not here to forget about bus, because that is as significant of a transit system that we have, not just metros, but all the regional systems that we know and love on all sides of the Potomac. So we, we're here. It's November 2021. It's about just under coming up on 2 years into a pandemic. Before the Blue Line train, or the Blue Line train derailment in October, things were not normal. I was joking before, but whatever the word normal means these days is it doesn't mean what it used to mean. Last year before, there have been Metro service changes, both on bus, rail, sort of everything under the sun. Sticking to Metro here, but obviously global implications, both in the U.S. And abroad. Specifically regarding at least Metrorail, we I had a screenshot in the bottom left here of a piece that I honestly had forgotten that I wrote about just over a year and a half ago of Metro's plan to close 17 stations and a bunch more of the system entrances of stations that had more than one entrance back in March after the reality sort of set upon the DC region. So that was, I'll actually go to the next slide and I'll probably come back because I have a screenshot here from one of Metro's slides. One of a nice set of data that they have just showing the over a set of 2-3 weeks back in last year, just a significant decrease in Metrorail ridership. Before early half of March, the first half of March, a little bit, you can see it more in February. Ridership was starting to grow again after a few years of safe track, platform projects, all the other construction activities that Metro has had going on. So there was sort of there's sort of a few pivotal points within the history of Metro. A couple that stick out are the 2009 rear red line train collision, which didn't have as much of a impact on ridership if you go back and look at the data, but the sort of the decade after, and the impact in the construction and impact to train frequencies, hours of service, all that. There's a lot that I'm glossing over, but it's been a sort of decade of decline, and now sort of before the pandemic was starting to see some growth back up on the rail ridership side. We were starting to see above 600,000 riders per day, closer to 625, 630. A couple of these days were even higher, but the averages were going in the right direction as far as rail ridership was concerned. And then we had a pandemic. Everyone that didn't need to take the trains and buses dropped off very, very quickly. And we go back, and because of that, sort of there were changes that Metro was able or had necessitated because of the changes from the pandemic. With fewer riders, there were impacts to the amount of revenue that Metro is taking in from bus and rail, primarily rail. That's sort of where most of the passenger revenue that Metro gets comes from. So because there were fewer people, within the realm of cost cutting and savings, a lot of the trains were headways were cut, or headways were widened, frequencies were cut. I always do that. And so a bunch of the older rail cars were put into what's sort of called cold storage. There's making the cars ready in a place where they can sit in a rail yard for a week, a month, 2 months on end, with the sort of minimal damage. Sort of like if you're going away on vacation, you some probably have some sort of routine before that, closing the windows, turning off lights, all that stuff. Similar thing for a rail car, just a much different process. And so that was mostly the 2000, the older cars that went into the cold storage, primarily the 2000 series trains, which is not the largest series that Metro has in operation, which is in the bottom right of the current fleet sort of composition. You can ignore the 8000s; those don't exist yet. So the older cars were being used less. The newer cars, the 7000 series, which were being used more. There are some good reasons for that. They are a lot more reliable than the older ones. But so that did mean that there were in case of an emergency, which we now find ourselves in, there were cars that were not easily able to come back to service, and that'll I'll talk a little bit more about that later here as well. So that was the 2000 series, sort of cold storage, and the 6000 series is another I should touch on now, and is I'm sure you've all have probably heard about all these in news stories on NBC4 and everywhere else. That the 6000 series cars also are, for the last year or so, have not been significantly available for service because of two incidents on the Red Line last year, sort of earlier during the pandemic. There were two, I believe there was one outside of Rhode Island Avenue and one outside of outside of Noma and Glenmont, where two cars of two trains came apart when they shouldn't have. Obviously a bad thing. So those fleets were grounded and are just now on their way back into the fleet. There are a bunch of reasons why they were grounded. There's some procedural and equipment and reasons that went into that. But that is, those are slowly being now brought back in. They before the 7K thing happened, the agency was hoping that all of those 6000s would be back in service or they could return those by the end of the year, which we'll have to see what happens based on how everything goes.
Stephen, just a quick question about the 6000s. Because was it was it 180 of the 6000s were cold, but as of I think, was it a couple of weeks ago, maybe 10% were back in service? Is that correct?
Yes, it's a moving number. I'm not exactly sure what the latest is, but about between 10 and 20% of the 6000s are back in service at this point. Okay. All of the 7000s are, which total are about 60-ish% of the fleet are out of service. The about 20-ish or so percent of the 6000s are back. I believe number-wise, I'd have to look this up. It is about 32 or 30 to 40-ish cars that are back in service. There's a process that the agency has to work through to get those back. Every pair of cars basically has to have a component called a coupler sort of overhauled, redone, and then go through a certification process, which includes not just Metro's rail car equipment mechanics, but a oversight process from the Washington Metrorail Safety Commission, the WMSC, and I'll probably have to get to use that acronym a few times later. I might as well segue into a quick explanation of the WMSC, since that is they certainly play a part in the 7000, the derailment and the aftermath of the derailment. The short story is that federal legislation required that every state or territory, DC included, DC, Virginia, Maryland, everyone set up their own state safety oversight agency, basically an independent group to oversee safety of any light rail or any passenger rail system throughout the U.S. That went into effect around 2015, or was passed, I believe, in 2015, and the WMSC, as a independent oversight body, was certified and started doing their work in 2018, I believe, March 2018, if I recall. Metro previously, through its history, had been Metrorail specifically. If I say Metro, I'm likely referring to Metrorail. had been overseen by a previous group called the TAC, the Tri-State Oversight Committee. There was the fundamental issue with that group is that there was no enforcement power to that agency. So they could issue recommendations, do audits, a lot of what the WMSC does, but they couldn't actually instruct or order Metro to do anything based on what they found. That in part,
I'm sorry, but Stephen, WMSC or the Metrorail Safety Commission can tell Metro to stand down and has authority to do that, to tell Metro things it does not want to hear.
Correct. Yep, and that is the sort of the basis of why the 7000 series trains are not back yet. Why it's almost coming up on a month after the derailment and they're still out of service. A couple of days after, it was the weekend after the derailment. So the derailment was on October 12th, which I believe was a Tuesday. The Sunday after the derailment, the WMSC had issued an order basically telling Metro to do 3 things. The first of which was to ground and stop using the 7000 series cars. I've heard there's been some internal talk that the agency was already moving on that path of grounding the cars by itself without needing an order, but that one's not part of the public record. The public record is the WMSC order, which grounded the cars, and which they did. And the second piece of that is sort of what we started seeing this week, which was that the agency need to put together a testing plan to verify that they could catch one of the issues that's suspect, or at least part of suspect for the derailment before it would get to a condition that could cause another derailment. There's some stuff with axles that they're checking, which I think I have a couple of things in a slide or two, that the wheels on axles are moving. That's obviously a bad thing. Wheels should not move on an axle especially when you're within the realm of trains. You stick them on and they're not supposed to move. The third part of the WMSC order is what Metro hopes to be able to do after the testing is done, which is present the plan and hopefully get their approval for how to getting the cars safely back into service. Metro, it's obviously not a good look on any account that 60% of the fleet, 748 cars of Metro's newest rail cars are not usable at the moment because of a derailment, which still being investigated, but they have this far into an investigation. There are leads and there are fault trees that they would be going down to do the whole root cause thing. But so the third part is to make sure to do a quick summary that removing the cars from service, testing to make sure the agency can catch issues before they happen, and then figuring out how to safely return the cars to service. And so that did fall under the authority that the WMSC has, because they are this different sort of newer oversight body that is able to tell Metro what they or if and when they need to, what they can or cannot do. It's not something that that they're going to say that they would wield lightly, but it's when they do, it can be effective, albeit, as we've seen, potentially to the detriment of riders who have for the past month or so have been working with 30-minute headways on most of these rail lines before some of the recent service increases have come back. Did get all the pieces of your question, Renee?
Yes, I guess I will just say from the rider's perspective, what being told that 180 trays are taken out of service a year ago, and only 10 or 20% were back a year later was a little disturbing. And so that was particularly when a whole bunch of other trains are then yanked out of service. So that was certainly curious about. So that was sort of what I was trying to get at, was that little detail. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, so that, yeah, an emergency, yeah, there are weird various confluences of events that happen when you have an emergency, like the derailment and pulling of the 7Ks. Because as far as what the number of rail cars that Metro actually needs for service, the 6,000s only there are 180 of those total. There were a few more, a couple have been crashed and damaged over the years. But with 180 cars out of the fleet, there was no from the rider side, there was no actual immediate impact. Trains were still running as frequently as they would have otherwise. Still, well, pandemic related and everything. So they were a small enough part of the fleet that they were trying to work through, get all the paperwork and get all the procedures and testing and everything done, so that the cars could begin re-entering the fleet on their original schedule. I don't recall the exact date. I think I had on the previous.
I'm sorry. I think you don't have to. I'm not gonna. I apologize. I feel like I've taken you down a little bit of rabbit hole, and please continue.
I go down rabbit holes. I'm prone to doing rabbit holes, but yeah. So I think the short takeaway is that the 7,000s just being such a large percentage of the fleet being pulled has immediate impacts to riders, because there's just no way for the agency to find other cars to fill the gaps in service caused by that occurring. 2, 3s and 2s and 6s, smaller, not great. And they were starting to some of the 6,000s were starting to re-enter about a month or two before the derailment. A very slow process, but that is, I would presume, being sped up now because of the need of so many of the cars now to try and get back to normal service levels. So there's a lot of fleet stuff going on before, during, and after this derailment thing. I don't believe there's anything else I wanted to touch on this one. I just wanted using this as a graphic to show just the immediate drop in ridership after the beginning of the pandemic last year, which led to the 2000s being grounded, decreases in train frequencies, impacts to the budget. It's been a very, very, very strange year, obviously not just for Metro, but especially related to some of these things. Before the derailment as well, I just have a snapshot in here from another Metro doc through August. Ridership we had basically found the bottom of both Metrorail and Metrobus ridership. Ridership was on its way back, slowly, very slowly, and significantly tied to the coronavirus pandemic, the Delta variant, all those factors. But it was there. We have generally trend-wise along the last few months of data, riders were coming back. There have been, within the past month or two, there's been a lot more discussions. I know the Greater Washington Partnership had a survey done of some of the big employers in the DC area, as far as how often people would come back, when they might institute return to work policies, all that. But as far as rail ridership was concerned, the numbers, or Metrorail was back to about a fourth to a third of pre-pandemic ridership, which not great, but I think the agency would take any progress that we'd be able to get during at this point during the pandemic. I was going back looking, doing some research. I sort of thought this tweet a month later was sort of funny. Just the optimism of Metro on October 4th, about a week before the derailment, sort of coming along the lines of the last slide that I had. 230 people, or 230 rides on rail, 284,000 on Metro bus on a single day on October 1st. There was, Delta and sort of everything aside, there was more optimism certainly than there is now. That people were returning to take transit rather than getting back in or shifting again away from cars or just doing the pure straight up telework. And then October 12th happened. A blue line train leaving Roslyn, heading south towards Franconia Springfield, derailed in the junction, sort of a little east, west of Roslyn. So the Roslyn station, there's a upper platform that heads inbound. There's a physically lower platform that heads outbound towards the Virginia side. In a switch where the two tracks diverge, just west of a couple hundred feet west of the platform, one of the axles of one of the cars on the blue line train, blue line train 407, derailed outside the station. All things considered, it was a fairly minor derailment. All the cars stayed upright. There were no injuries. There were no fatalities. One person, I believe, was what ended up going to the hospital for something anxiety related. I think the Post had a quick post about that. But at least sort of the as far as the people were concerned, it was a quote unquote a minor derailment, as an agency like depending on how you classify it. Obviously, the impacts because of this are not. So I'm not going to wouldn't describe it like that for any of the post derailment activities. So the derailment happened. The 7000 series trains got pulled. There was a fun couple of days of sort of fun in the greatest sense of the term. I will use that very sarcastically. That all the 7000 series cars were pulled. Metro sent a tweet about 8 p.m. on a Sunday before a weekday that the cars would be out of service, and the next day they would have about 35-ish to 40 trains available that people could use to get where they were. On the writer side, that resulted in 30 to 40 minute headways. If a train was missing, that would be 30 to 60. It was not a great couple of days, sort of all around from anyone's perspective. I think I would hope Metro leaders, I think, have. I think the general manager Paul Wiedefeld has had his comments on or mentioned that that didn't live up to what the agency would hope to provide. That was also that was done quickly enough that there were schedules weren't able to be updated immediately. So if you were looking at Metro's Trip Planner, Metro Hero, any of the other third-party tools that have train schedules, those wouldn't have been updated, and so you don't really have a great sense of when the train is coming, which when a train's coming more than about every 10 minutes is something that you really want, so people know when to get to a station. So if you go back on Twitter, there were lots and lots of complaints from people from that day. Let's see, the sort of immediately there at least one one possible cause, which the NTSB started talking about the Monday after the derailment was when they had their first press briefing, and they were looking into the axles of the 7000 series cars. So typical axle. I'll go to the next slide because that might help for a little bit of visual. So a typical axle, it's a metal thing across. You've got wheels on either side. The A in the picture sort of it points to a thing in between the two wheels, but you can see the wheels at the bottom of the picture in this slide. There's a bunch of other stuff in the way. You've got tubes and things, but at least the sort of the arc of the curve of the wheels on either side. One of the things they're looking into and are still looking into, and is a major part of the testing that's going on, is how far apart the wheels on the axles are. The Metro's tracks are at a fixed width. Every train runs on 2 tracks. Those tracks stay at a fixed distance from each other. If the tracks either are too narrow or too wide, or the same for wheels, if the wheels are too close or too far apart, the train will possibly come off the tracks, which is what happened for the derailment. This train actually derailed 3 times on that day. Two times before the third one, when it finally stopped, and when the operator noticed there was an issue, and we started on this whole thing. There was one prior derailment on the inbound track. I believe it was at Arlington Cemetery, on a previous run from Arlington Cemetery heading towards Roslyn, and then another at the Largo terminal, since it was a Blue Line station, and when it was turning around. Both of the way the tracks are set up in those places where they're crossovers, trains can cross from one track to the other. The train was able to sort of re-rail itself and get back on the tracks, and it kept on going. And nobody knew those 2 incidents had occurred until the third one, and they started pulling data and looking into what happened during and before the derailment. But one of several things that they're looking into as far as the investigation is the wheel distance on the axles. In the Metro awarded, Kawasaki is a company that builds the 7000 series trains. They build them in Lincoln, Nebraska. There was one document I saw called a wheel set inspection event, in quotes. That's a quote from one of those docs, that there was evidence during some testing or evaluation. I'm not exactly sure of the circumstance, but they saw that something like this may be happening when the cars were being manufactured, that the one or both of the wheels weren't where they should be. It looked like there was something going on, and so there was a specification that was changed to basically press the wheels onto the axles harder. There was a previous, there's a range of about 55 to 80 tons of pressure that's used to put the wheels onto the axles to make sure that they're secure. That was bumped up from a minimum of 50 to 65 tons to try to make sure that was more secure. There's the fit of the wheel around the axle was also slightly changed as well to try and fix that issue. So that occurred in 2017, and as we now know from the NTSB, the inspections of the wheels and the distance between them have sort of slowly been, or have initially slowly, and now sort of more frequently than probably anyone would like, increasing since then. There were two inspection failures in 2017, 2018, and it jumped up to, I believe it was 18 earlier in 2021. And after the derailment, there were 20 axles that were found out, essentially out of tolerance, so that the wheels were too wide or too narrow. In this case, typically too wide. So the NTSB found that they were investigating this derailment. They're still investigating. We don't know when that is going to finish. But the focus on the axles is basically one of the primary drivers of the current month of testing that Metro is doing during November, to try and see, making a couple of changes to their procedures to try to at least initially get the cars back in service while the root cause investigation continues through the NTSB, through the greater NTSB investigation. The one thing I'll call out from this slide before going to the next one, just has a couple more pictures. That Metro, the current inspection process to check these wheel distances is every 90 days. So someone, one of the Metro rail car mechanics, or someone in one of the shops gets under the car, comes into one of the shop bays. Someone gets under the car, uses that metal shiny thing that's under the wheels to perform what's called a back-to-back measurement, to try and see find the distance and measure the distance that the distance part the wheels are. That's done every 90 days currently, and as of last week, Metro is proposing to decrease that for the 7000s down to every 8 days. So a pretty drastic drop in that inspection, which will increase the frequency of that just about tenfold. There are a couple other questions about if that is actually feasible as far as time and space wise, but that is inspecting them every 8 days is what Metro thinks is sort of the time interval they would need in order to catch this issue before it gets bad enough that they would have to something else like a derailment would happen again. So that's sort of that was part of the testing plan that Metro submitted to the WMSC last week to try and validate that the 8-day interval is actually borne out by the data that Metro is going to get by the tests. They think that's the interim solution, but the testing that is ongoing as of yesterday is what they hope will actually show and validate that that's actually going to work. And then as other changes or anything root cause related to the investigation, this is the sort of the first step in order to get the 7000 series trains back. So the Metro had a couple of nice pictures yesterday of one of the two 7000 series test trains running on the yellow line. Currently on the yellow line, it's going to be there for 4 days, and then it'll switch to, I believe, the orange line is next. Basically, they're taking these two trains, running them a bunch basically up and back all day for the entirety, or for basically the entirety of November, to get enough mileage on the cars so that they have to get a good data set that the agency can try to extrapolate and make inferences and actions from. So if you see one of these two trains with those stickers in the windows where it says no passenger test train, or peer in with those nice cardboard boxes, which are just simulating people on the trains, so they're just big weights essentially. Those are the two trains being used for this second part of the WMSC order, the testing portion, to try and validate that Metro could find this issue before something else bad happened, if they were once there to put them back into service. Only pause there for a second, read a couple comments, I guess, from the chat, or if anyone has any questions, that's easier just to say out loud. I can try and take a crack at those, anything that of we've covered, the testing plan or the 7,000 bunch. Yes, there's a question in here from Paul Gomez. It's a great question. It's about if he's read that the 7,000 series rail cars are heavier than the previous series. Might that have had an effect? Or a potential cause of the derailment? That is a great question, and I'm sure that they're looking, or the NTSB is looking into that. But I would not suspect of that to be a significant factor to the derailment, because the overall, once you typically on a loaded train, once you factor in how heavy people are, when you have 100 or 60, 80, 100, 120 people on a packed rail car, the difference in weight between the 7,000 series trains and the older ones ends up being not insignificant, but is a lot smaller than what probably would make a difference in a situation like the derailment. The difference, I believe it's around 7 to 10,000 pounds difference between the sevens and the legacy cars, the 6,000s and before. But when you have 100 people on the car, everyone weighs 100, 200 pounds, however, some, and there's however, whatever weights, calculate all that up, it ends up not, in the grand scheme of things, not as much, but I'm sure that'll be, sort of at a greater level, the sort of the interaction of the rail car and the rails, if there are any differences in forces on the rails or the axles. All of that is sort of falls very well within the NTSB's wheelhouse. They have a lab in DC, and I'm sure they have others, and they consult with FRA folks all the time, and they do a lot of that kind of sort of inferent work into to figure out if that kind of thing has an impact. I don't think that'll play much of a factor here, but we'll have to see when the NTSB investigation wraps up. As far as when the NTSB investigation wraps up, that is also a great question, because no one outside the NTSB knows. They typically take about around 18 months or so, anywhere between a year or 2 years for an NTSB investigation is what we see with other prior derailments, prior anything train or plane related, whether it's there are fatalities, no fatalities, anything that's not an immediate, not a sort of a very clear cause and effect, like a car being driven past it's probably a bad example, but car being driven past a gate at a railroad crossing. We'll know hopefully when something happens. They don't really like telegraphing their actions if they don't have to. So it's just really hard to tell. Parts of the things that we don't know, the root cause, the NTSB is looking into that. I think there's certainly a focus on the axles and how the wheels were put onto the axles, but that is, we'll see if that's borne out by the testing that's ongoing, the NTSB investigation, and everything else that they're looking into. They're going to look deeper than any of us as journalists or blog contributors can They're getting samples of the metal, doing metallurgy analysis, all sorts of really deep stuff that the NTSB does during their investigations. One of the one of the questions up here, less that I have seen or that sort of I've had Adam Tuss from NBC4 has brought up, and other reporters who at the agency know about this issue, how far up did it go, when did they know, sort of all of those questions about how this how this issue sort of sat or was allowed to continue for 4 years, when the we started knowing about at least the wheel and axle fit thing in 2017. 4 years later, here we are, where it's a possible contributing factor to a derailment. Was it handled properly? Was it escalated to the safety or other departments when it should have? All those questions. That is, how much that we on the outside end up knowing about that is still very much to be determined. My guess for that would be that the NTSB, as far as will shed some light into that when they do during their typical interview process of people that have some relation to the derailment. They'll probably be investigating the operator of the train, rail car mechanics, people in Metro Safety Department. They typically do get a lot of that first-hand knowledge, so they know where to look to try to find the root cause. They're not going to point fingers, but that we'll see what light we can get shed from that, as well as any sort of what Ronit hinted at the beginning, any information, emails, things that we learned from Metro's Freedom of Information Act process. There's anything related to the derailment or causes of the derailment that will end up coming out of any of those. There'll be probably some more digging and piecing together from those kinds of things. The fifth bullet, I don't have an answer either to the impact on rider trends. Is the derailment and the subsequent impact to service going to be enough to keep people from riding Metrorail? We have some initial numbers that Metro has published online, which doesn't. Well, it's very early to say. It doesn't seem like there might be a long-term trend based on as long as service remains reliable, albeit decreased from before, but it's just really hard to tell about that one, and especially pulling that to see what impact the derailment had compared to the COVID, the pandemic, telework, all those other things that are going on. Anything data related is just very hard to tell at this point. So the really last question, when are things coming back to normal? Which is the question that we do not have an answer to at this point. I had on the slide, I have this graphic from, not the bunnies yet, graphic from a Metro presentation. I believe it was from 2 weeks ago, sort of laying out the process or the initial process for how service would come back to the rail system as they're able to get more cars online, bring the 2000s back out of cold storage, bring the 6000s recertified with the new couplers, all that stuff. And we sort of this week just sort of hopped to this phase 2 that they have on the graphic. So if you've seen Metro's announcement from yesterday, the red line is back to running every 12 minutes. Green and yellow are every 20, and the rest, orange, silver, and blue, are every 30. But when those combine, in the downtown areas, they run more frequently. So we have some service that's come back from the initial very, very barren, 30 to 40-minute schedule. But it's still, still far from where we were before the derailment and before the pandemic. At this point, I think my best guess is that we probably see some sort of semblance of normal, or at least have a sense of what that is sometime in January. I would think I would probably like the first half-ish of January if I were to take a wild guess at these things. We're likely not going to have an answer on the testing plan. I would, at this point, I believe probably by the end of November, there'll be some back and forth between Metro, the WMSC, the NTSB, if they need to get involved with anything, sort of all that procedural stuff behind the scenes there, and then any sort of re-ramping phase on the other side of that. So it's my best guess at this point. I will be happy to be proven wrong in a month if we see improvements, but I'm not holding my breath to see normal service back in December at this point, given what we know and what still is between us and where Metro needs to be. That has sort of dovetails into ridership impacts, sort of what I mentioned on the previous slide, and then the next fiscal year, which starts in July, and then everything in that year and beyond. If the whole telework thing stays and riders are sort of in general don't come back, what does that mean to Metro's budget? What does that mean to if the budget is impacted? What does that mean to service? All those things are interrelated, and if we the board is starting to talk about this, but it's the very beginning discussions of the sort of the long-term trends where things are going once this derailment is behind us. I believe that's everything that I had for my presentation, or at least what I was thought I would talk about today. I included slide for Q&A. Both of these pictures are train related, so I figured I'd throw them in. The one on the left is a bunny rabbit I took at the Colorado State Railroad Museum. I sort of cropped out, there is a rail car at the top of the picture. And the one on the right is from a trip I took out west or to Glacier National Park, which is taken on the Amtrak's Empire Builder. And so I figured that one was fair game to throw in here as a final slide of the prepared remarks. So let me find where if I can pull wherever my chat window went, if I can find that again, and I'll try or see if there are other questions on what I covered and anything that I didn't cover. Feel free to drop those in the chat if we have the raised hand function, or you can just shout out questions as well.
Can we do this in real sound?
Oh, absolutely. Go for it.
Okay. All right. So I think I saw a question earlier about why Metrorail doors are so slow to open up at stations. It's incredible. I've been on systems around Europe and around the rest of the States, and this is the only place that takes, I don't know, 5 seconds to open the doors. Why?
Yeah, so there's a sort of, as with anything Metro, there is a oddly long backstory to why that is. Metro has a policy in place that's been in place for a number of years now, that the operators have to wait between 3 and 5 seconds after they stop the train at a station before they're procedurally allowed to open the doors. There have been a couple instances in the past that there were, back when Metro ran more mixed, either 6-car trains or 8-car trains, that some operators of, and this is sort of dating myself in the memory of the system, that when the agency ran 6-car trains, which we haven't really been doing until a couple weeks ago, they stopped at a different spot on the platform. So sort of more center in the platform rather than pulling all the way to the front. So there were a couple instances that operators of 8-car trains forgot or didn't realize they had 8 cars, and so they stopped at the 6-car marker, which is too short, and when they opened doors, the trailing car was still in the tunnel, and so it's a safety issue. People that the trailing car, there's no. Sometimes you can get to the platform from that, but usually not. So part of that led to that 3 to 5 second rule. Before the operators can do that, can open the doors. And there's a nuance on the 7000 series trains as well. And there's a sort of a software acknowledgement that the operator needs to push a button to acknowledge basically that the train itself also recognizes that it is berthed and stopped and properly at a station platform before the doors can open. That when at some point in the future, we get back to, or Metro starts running the trains in what's called automatic door operation mode, that the doors just automatically open at the station when the train arrives. That a lot of that time difference should decrease, should go away again, but we don't have, there's no public timeline on when ADO is coming back, and the automatic train operations, or the greater trains running themselves thing, is sort of a bigger question mark. There are steps that have been happening, but there's no public answer on that. So it's one of those, to answer the question, it's one of those things that feels like one of those only at Metro type of things, but is sort of has a nuanced history on both the technical side and technical and manual operator involvement for the doors. Let's see. So Ronnie dropped a question into the chat. Can we really have normal service when the 7000s are going to be tested so frequently? So the idea that Metro is currently floating is that every 7000 series train, rail car, would need to be in the shop and inspect and have its axles, wheels measured every 8 days, so that we don't have another derailment. There are 748 rail cars. Every rail car has 4 axles, and every part of one of the procedures, which I believe is probably going to become practice going forward, that every wheel is going to be measured 3 times around the wheel in 3 different spots to get that measurement. So every rail car going into one of Metro's limited shop bays is a great question to know if that is even feasible for them to do. Because every time a 7000 series train has to go into one of the maintenance bays, that's potentially taking away space that the agency needs to do regular maintenance and overhaul work. If they're doing regular brake work, proposal, and all the normal things that you would do with a train when it's in a shop. So that is a great question. I do not have. I think my answer. I need to do some math to try and figure out an answer to that. But I think at this point, I do tend towards thinking that's not really a feasible scenario long term for the agency to do. It is, depending on how the testing goes, it is possible that not every car needs to be inspected 8 days. The cars that were produced after the wheel specification change occurred in 2017, which is about half of the 7000s, when the wheels were pressed on with the higher it's the press tonnage, so a minimum of 65 tons of pressure onto the wheels. If the testing shows that those don't need to be inspected as often as the sort of the initial set of half of the cars, that would make the math for that a lot easier. If there are only about 350, 400 cars that need to be inspected every 8 days, rather than all 748. I think the definitive answer for that is hopefully going to come at the end of this month, or at least at the end of the first 2 weeks of testing, when Metro has an initial data set that they're going to analyze and provide, work with the WMSC to try and figure out, what the path forward is. They're hoping all the data looks good so they can put the new procedure in place and that 7000s can come back. But if, it's testing, so there's always a possibility that other things might come up during that time. Hopefully not, but we will see. I should also note that the testing period that Metro has laid out is a 24-day testing period, broken up, and when the test trains will run sort of sequentially down, and by the end of that period will run all four of the Metrorail lines. At the end of 12 days of testing, they'll do some initial data, but we will see those two test trains in service through 24 days from yesterday. So that's not going away incredibly soon. Let's see, let me go back, make sure I didn't miss anything on the earlier side in here. And yeah, feel free to shout out any questions as well. I am not. Do I know why WMATA didn't choose open carriage style cars like London, New York, Toronto, all the world-class systems? We sort of do, but the answer probably leaves more questions than we would like. The Metro's answer for not, yes, I will. Where do I?
Hey, Stephen, I just did it manually.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I was looking for it's one of those buttons in Zoom I can never find. So the initial answer Metro had for not doing the open gangway style trains where you can walk from one car to the other without having to leave one is that the new upcoming series, the 8000 series cars, were initially meant to sort of be they called it a subfleet of the 7000s, that the cars they were intending for it to be a small order, about 256 cars, I believe. They would look basically the same as the 7000s. They weren't going to make any major differences to those cars initially. That's what they told me, I think about 2-3 years ago at this point. They then put in, got the 8000 series procurement out. The cars are being made by Hitachi. We should see them somewhere around 2025, give or take. We'll have to see how everything goes. But that's one of the, sort of the decision made early. One of the decisions made early on is that they weren't expecting to buy a lot of them. So with open gangway trains, you can have there are other costs that sort of come with those upfront, with changes to rail yard configurations, how they're managed inside of the shops, and if they have to go up on lifts, and some other the maintenance side of things that would change or could potentially change, and they sort of stuck with the original item and or the original RFP for the 8000s and went with it. New York, in their last order with Kawasaki, is I think that it was about 10 or so articulated cars that that they ordered as a initial test trial run. Given how the rest of the world is going, I mean, that's very, very paltry compared to the size of New York, which has, you know, thousands of rail cars, hundreds of rail stations. But so they're ahead of us, although it seems we'll have to see how much. And since rail cars typically last about 40 years, unless they're retired early, it is not a decision that has, you know, can be fixed really in the short term. We're going to be we're going to have the 7000s and soon to be 8000 series cars for many, many years, unless there's a last minute change to the 8000 series contract with Hitachi to add some of those, which I don't really see coming. And there's no one sort of really on the political side is pushing for it, which is, you know, typically how a lot of things at Metro and local transit agencies end up happening. So I don't see that coming anytime in the first half of this century.
Okay, the time looks like it's advancing pretty close to the end. If there's one final question for our speaker, this would be a good time to ask it. And after that, I guess we'll wrap up.
This is Renita, and I'm sort of going to tie in a question that sort of combine two things from a question that Paul threw in the chat and something I did as well. Paul's question is there any way a layperson can evaluate whether the powers that be are appropriately balancing safety versus service? And mine question sort of parallels that, saying, you know, what is a productive role for transit advocates here? You know, and my opinion, there's, you know, we already have two safety agencies. We have Kawasaki, we have WMATA, and I don't think they need our engineering expertise. Although I certainly think, I certainly know that, you know, we've learned during the pandemic that there, you know, whether it's engineering or epidemiology, you know, there's a lot of, you know, excellent experts out there on Twitter and Facebook. Is there something that, so, you know, as Paul says, is there a way to evaluate whether the powers that be are balancing safety versus service? And my question is there something transit advocates should be pushing for now or in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, there's a lot to go into both of those questions, and I'll try to give that my best shot. To the first about, you know, balancing safety and service, the agencies that, well, the WMSC, the agency that oversees Metrorail, is primarily sort of specifically focused on safety of the system. They, you know, they're not being judged by impact to riders if they make safety decisions. They're disconnected from sort of the, you know, the politics of how everything that WMATA happens. So I think their focus is certainly on safety, you know, safety as the main thing that is in the, you know, the federal legislation that enabled them to become an agency. There's sort of the corollary to that is that, you know, nothing will ever be 100% safe. There's always going to be something that happens, as, you know, we just do, you know, they work to decrease those percentages. So there is a point at which, you know, the risk they're willing to, that the WMSC and the NTSB are willing to accept. And at least for the NTSB, they have, you know, prior, you know, a whole bunch of publications that we can look at to see how they, you know, how they judge safety compared to service, and all that. That one is less important than how the WMSC views those two, because the NTSB again can't force Metro to do anything. It's only the only the WMSC that has regulatory authority to actually tell Metro to stop running the 7000 series cars. So it's really up to them. And since it is a fairly new agency, it's a bit harder to tell, sort of where they view that balance is. There's I think a lot of that more will come to play in the ongoing discussions between them and WMATA. WMATA, who has more of a focus on actual service, which the WMSC doesn't, but also the focus on safety, so that in the two of those at a high level, the chief safety officer at WMATA and the folks at the WMSC and both their staffs will, they're the ones that will in the end make that, or make the ones making that determination where that ends, where that lies. I think at this point, given what we know, it does seem that the grounding of the entire fleet, well, well, it was a little bit hasty too, but may not, not as as we've learned more, may not necessarily be required, but it's just they made the call on the safety side rather than than service. Everyone is going to have their own, there's no answer, one answer to that one. So it's I will be curious to see how they fall in that range when the testing finishes and Metro proposes to how they want to bring, how they think they can bring the 7000s back to service. Be curious on how much back and forth there is, what changes to that plan the WMSC requires. And unfortunately for us, all of that is basically behind closed doors. Only very little of that actually makes it to the WMATA board or to the Washington Post, WMU, all the usual journalism outlets. So I think it's an unsatisfying answer to that, as far as seeing from the outside, seeing sort of how the sausage is made for those that are interested. But for on the transit advocacy side, there are a bunch of constraints at not just Metro, but also all of the regional transit authorities, specifically that they all have operator shortages. There are not enough people to run all the trains, all the buses that they want, which Metro has. There was at least one press release from Metro a little while back. So I know a few other advocates that I've seen on Twitter have been looking into, and I've tried to look on the Fairfax side myself as well on what the elected leaders are doing as far as ways to do more with what we have now, to do to reallocate space, to do bus lanes or other quick on the quicker side of quick wins that we can do. I think it's bus lanes are a great thing. Some of those we've seen in other cities that they can be done pretty quickly with not a lot of upfront money or road changes, and then come back. You can come back to those later with more permanent red paint. Like DC's H&I street bus lanes sort of initially followed that as that was related to a closure on Metro's Red Line, sort of on the eastern side near Fort Totten. So as far as the advocacy side, I think that doing anything or asking for anything with needing more people is probably not, whether that's more buses, more whatever, or anything else along that lines, probably is not really doable, at least in the short term. But better ways to do things more efficiently with what we have is what I'd say are probably the areas to focus on.
Well, I want to thank Stephen for an extremely detailed, extremely thoughtful, and extremely thorough presentation. It's certainly been a college course in transit infrastructure for me, And I appreciate you taking the time to bring us up to date on the 7000 series issues and prospects for improvement in hopefully the not too distant future. Our next meeting is Tuesday, December 14th. We will have a preview of the always exciting Maryland legislative session. And if people are interested in knowing what their state representatives will be up to in the coming year, that will be a meeting to tune in on. And so until December, thank you for all attending, and have a great week.
Thanks.